We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another edition of Weed Talk Now. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And we also have a very special guest standing by with us. His name is David Rabinovitz. He's been a regular on our Weed Talk series of monthly live streams that Curt and I have hosted and co-hosted over the last 7 or 8 months. And we'll be getting to David because we are going to be talking about how cannabis businesses can survive during this work shutdown. Now, David, just so give you a little bit of an intro here. He's the CEO of NEWCANN, a group applying for a license in Massachusetts. He's also a sought-after financial consultant in the cannabis space, a regular contributor on our shows, and a champion of social justice, helping out many economically empowered candidates in Massachusetts. David, thank you so much for taking the time and getting on with us today.
Hey, thanks, Jimmy. It's good to be here with you, even if only virtually.
That's right. But you know what? We're certainly practicing our social distancing. Everyone that watches this obviously has been affected by the COVID-19 virus. We're all trying to socially distance and still maintain some sanity so that we can connect with others, because we do believe that is so important. So I'm going to throw it out there, actually. And I'm going to go right to Curt first, Curt, because I know you have insight on businesses and small businesses in the cannabis space. So the question is, of course, how are you going to sustain and keep going what you do?
Well, on the media side, it's difficult right now because as the job cuts come in across the country, let alone in cannabis, where you're going to see funding dry up publicly and privately, especially for cannabis and what's called alt investments. And the first people that usually get cut are marketing and PR, because they're the guys, you can kind of get rid of. You can slow down your SEO work. You could slow down your content. So if you're in the media space, finding clients that have a PR or an SEO team to talk to is now difficult. And a lot of those brands are going to be cutting back, on spending, trying to kind of, like you said, make it. This is going to be a survival mode, not profit mode. So getting clients and getting people that want to pay for ads, let alone products, will be a challenge. Now, obviously, there is that slice of clients, people that are doing well. The deliveries, California, Colorado, Washington, those guys are doing great, but they have a very limited geo area that they're interested in servicing. They don't service a state, they service an area. So it's going to be tough times. And I just saw that, we had talked about, Jimmy, in one of our shows last month, how the cannabis market was really beaten down already. It's very bad out there. What happens if we lose a third of the regular market just as a regular recession? And here we are, and you're seeing the ramifications. I think MJ Biz Daily just put out there how cannabis companies are struggling mightily right now for financing and funding. Now throw in the Corona part of the market, and it's even worse. So everyone knows what's going on out there.
That's for sure. David, you tell me, how can cannabis businesses survive given the environment that Curt has just kind of described beautifully, I might add?
So cannabis businesses are in a bind that they've been in for a while. They're not eligible for any of the federal bailout money. In fact, I just posted an article I wrote that I just posted it on LeafWire, along with some SBA guidance information that talks about who within the marijuana segment cannot access these kind of funds. Marijuana businesses can't access bankruptcy court. So that involves a whole host of complications. But there's a lot of strategies that people can employ to try to survive the time. And a lot of that is cutting expenses down to the bone.
David, can you turn on the video on your end so that we can see that great beard that you've grown over the last few? That would be your playoff beard or your COVID-19 beard, right?
Yeah, that's my April 1st beard.
And so basically, we've outlined what's going on here. With no help on the horizon from this federal bailout plan for cannabis industries, I know, David, you have been in demand for your expertise on how best to stay afloat. You got any ideas for everybody?
Since most of the people watching this are in the marijuana segment, the best thing you can do is look at your costs and get them cut back. Talk to your landlord about reducing or deferring your rent until we get past this. If you're a retailer, obviously you're going to be forced to lay staff off. Otherwise, you may need to cut staff hours back to match the cash flow that you have. If you've got receivables that are due from retailers, don't expect to collect that money for a while. If the retailers aren't open, they're not generating cash. So it's going to be a tight time, especially for the Massachusetts marijuana operators.
On the medical side of things in Massachusetts, they've allowed the medical dispensaries to stay in business and keep their doors open. And obviously it has hurt the adult use recreational businesses out there, including our friend in Boston, Kobe Evans and Pure Oasis. Were you surprised that Governor Baker shut down adult use rec?
Yes and no. I thought that it was a little bit excessive. I understand his position that he's worried about visitors coming in from out of state. He's looking to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth. But the flip side is there are workarounds. The Cannabis Control Commission could have instructed stores to only accept Massachusetts licenses and Massachusetts IDs on the grounds that they don't want to aid and abet people transferring marijuana across state lines. He clearly does not like the marijuana industry, and I think this was just another punch in the gut for a business that he would probably love to see fail.
Curt, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with David in the sense we talked earlier in a show about there was a way to do this for the compromise, which we mentioned. All of these dispensaries are running one of 5 or 6 POS, which point of sale, which like a Leafly pickup ties into a Weed Maps, MJ Freeway. There is a way that you could sell, much like the Five Guys model is doing now, curbside pickup, make an appointment. If you're worried about too many people in the parking lot and their cars waiting, set the appointment of when you can pick it up. There's ways to do it, and Governor Baker does not seem interested in exploring them. Hence to David's point, he's just not really a fan, and he puts up with us. He doesn't like the vote that he lost, but he's certainly not going out of his way to make cannabis available to recreational users in times of stress and times of anxiety.
It's a necessary evil that Charlie Baker, the governor of Massachusetts, has to deal with. And we both have kind of outlined that he's not a big fan, but more importantly, he is giving a message to those that are in that adult use recreational space that he's still not going to make it as easy as possible for you. And he has, again, this is what frustrates me. I don't understand how he can make an exception, especially with some kinds of compromises out there. And I know he's been inundated with a variety of messages, blogs. The cannabis advocates have, obviously formed up and gone after the governor. But again, I don't know if anything's going to happen anytime soon. David, you're writing about the Paycheck plan. Can you explain a little bit about what that's all about?
Sure. Anybody who's in business right now is all over the Paycheck protection program. It is basically a grant program from the Small Business Administration. And here's the gist of it. Rather than sending people home and putting them onto unemployment, the government has reasoned that it would be better to keep people employed. And so they're willing to kick up the amount of money if business that they will lend to businesses and forgive if businesses will keep staff on the payroll and continue health insurance for the next 8 weeks. So it's a program that you can apply for equal to, in real simple terms, 2.5 times your monthly payroll cost, where payroll includes health benefits. You can use it for, you've got to use most of the money for payroll, employee benefits. You can use some for rent and some for certain utilities. And subject to some limitations, they will forgive most of the money that's due as long as you spend it that way over 8 weeks. Bear in mind, now these are statistics I picked up earlier today. The SBA lending program last year, I believe, was about a $23 billion program. That's a pretty sizable program. This program is about a $350 billion program. So you've got banks that are now going to need to write loans that may be smaller than the typical SBA loan. The government will fully guarantee them, so they should go through quickly. But the sheer volume is going to swamp the bank's ability to underwrite these loans. And I've heard that there are some major national banks that may not participate in the program because the loans are going to be forgiven within about 8 to 10 weeks. And they're trying to understand how they're going to make money by lending out and having the loan taken off their books in 8 to 10 weeks. And if it doesn't come off their books, the interest rate is only 0.5%. So they got a 2-year loan on 0.5%. There's no money in it.
Isn't the Small Business Administration a federal group?
Yeah, the Small Business Administration is a part of the federal government.
So how are they going to loan money to the I don't understand how the cannabis operators have access to that if it's a federally illegal substance and they've done everything possible to keep money out of the banking system.
Oh, not only do the cannabis folks not have access to it, Jimmy.
Thank you.
But if you're what the SBA calls a direct marijuana business, somebody that grows, produces, processes, distributes, or sells marijuana, then you don't have access to it. If you're what they call an indirect marijuana business, and now that's a business that derives any of its gross revenue for the previous year from sales to a direct marijuana business, then you can't have access to it. And I'll tell you what's interesting about this. It's not that you get the bulk of your revenue. It's a business that derives any of its gross revenue. So if you do business with a marijuana business, you're not supposed to be eligible for these programs. Now, bear in mind, this is all really complicated stuff. The SBA guidance memo was issued a few years ago. It according to its own terms, expired in, actually, interesting. It expired last year, April 1st, 2019, but without anything out there to replace it, it's very likely that's what the SBA is going to fall back on. So the marijuana businesses are left out in the cold. They can't go into bankruptcy court if they get into trouble, which means creditors can just come in and take the companies apart. The nice part about it is the courts are closed right now. Most courts are only handling criminal matters. And from what I've heard, they're only handling criminal matters because under the Constitution, you have a right to a speedy trial. So we're living through some interesting times right now. Fortunately, Jimmy, you like I have been around through a number of economic catastrophes. We'll get through it. It's just going to be how to navigate and what's going to pop up.
Right. And I know you remember when Young Broadcasters of America opened that weekend. It was 2008, October, when the entire world's economy got cut in half. So I'm on a roll here. Whenever I get into some kind of new venture, the entire world goes up. Curt, I know you got a few more questions you want to ask directly to David.
So the unemployment numbers came out. I know you're an econ guy. You had, was it 3.5 last week, and today was 6.5. So we're looking around 10 million in 10 days. We going super high? You think we're peaking? What's your outlook for just the general unemployment number going forward after today's?
I think it's going to go even higher.
And bear in mind, 30 million, or where you got another 10% left? Kind of what you thinking?
I'm not an economist as to these things, so this is just like an everyday man guess. I'm speaking, so when Jimmy mentioned I'm pretty busy, I'm busy because I'm doing a lot of things that are not cannabis related right now and helping businesses, conventional, regular businesses figure out what their plan is to survive this so they don't go out of business. A lot of business planning, building models, that sort of thing. There is a tremendous focus on this Friday, because last Friday, the bill was signed that's going to bring out the CARES Act, which is going to put in $2 trillion of relief. And everybody believes this Friday, the application is going to come out for these SBA loans. I've been predicting for a couple of days, if the application comes out on Friday, people are going to be upset because systems are going to crash. The volume is going to be just so immense unless they have somebody like Amazon behind this. And I question whether even Amazon could handle it. I think the systems are going to crash. Now overlay that with, you've got a lot of banks that haven't determined whether they even want to participate in the program. And then you've got a lot of businesses that are just waiting for Friday, and they haven't thought this whole thing through. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. They're not going to get the money next week. I heard a seminar today where the leader said he spoke to some bankers who think it could take them up to 2 weeks before they're doling money out. That means another 2 weeks of this, that's going to be more people laid off. More businesses that thought that I'm going to apply on this Friday, I'll get my money on Monday, and we'll make it through. That's not going to happen. And I think you're going to see, as a result of it, it's just going to roll forward with more people being laid off and onto the unemployment lines.
Let me ask a question. I got a quick question, Curt. Let me jump in here, and it's on our list. If there are private lenders available, and on LinkedIn, you know, if you're in the cannabis space at all, you're getting inundated with people saying, hey, you need a business loan? Hey, how'd you like to, let us loan you some money? How do you tell the legitimate ones from those that are trying to just con you out of some money?
That's an interesting question, Jimmy. I mean, I would say one thing, go to their website, ask them, will they put in writing what their terms are going to be?
So you don't do this over Venmo or PayPal, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't do this over Venmo or PayPal. And I'll warn anybody who's listening here. I've written a couple of articles that are up on Dig Boston that I would suggest you look at. There's a few things that I've learned over the past week, and I've been doing a lot of reading about these programs. I spent the weekend reading the relevant sections of the law, this 880-page law. Number one, don't trust anything you hear unless it is, or you read, unless it is on a .gov website. So if it's not at treasury.gov or SBA.gov, don't believe it.
Okay.
There's plenty of good, credible sources that are putting information out, but they're summarizing the information. And you can have two sources that summarize the information. You put it side by side. And I know somebody who went through this morning, and they say these explanations, the one from the CPA firm doesn't match the one from the Chamber of Commerce. And then they become confused because it is a complex program. When you try to distill it down to a soundbite, you have to take out a lot of the words, and the words give it to the nuance to figure out exactly what it means. If somebody offers to help you get one of these loans, don't give them any sensitive financial information or personal information. And if they wish to be paid for their services, or they need a credit card or a check up front, don't do it.
There you go.
These loans are not very difficult to fill out the application. It's only a couple of page application. It's not even based on your credit worthiness. It's based upon whether you've been impacted. You review 4 or 5 questions. You fill the form out. They want to know what your payroll is. They tell you how to figure it out. You put the numbers in. And as I understand it, what the lenders are going to do to qualify the businesses is not review your financial statements and are you profitable and do you have cash flow. They're going to look to say, did you give us the right payroll records? Are the numbers correct? And here, I put those numbers into the formula, make sure they have the documentation to back it up and say you're approved. And you don't have to give a personal guarantee, and you don't have to pledge collateral. I mean, from that point of view, it's a great program. But 2 years from now, when this is all over and there's some committee that's looking backward and they start to comb through the records and they find people who lied on these applications, that will be when the news starts talking about all of the prosecutions that are going on for fraud from the old coronavirus loan program.
Curt?
Yeah, I agree with you. There's going to be fraud in this because basically it's too easy to get money, and that's no disrespect to the current pandemic. You're right. And this will be right up your alley. Your next question, obviously, the unemployment is going to roll into the next higher up. So we're reversing the order. So here we are, April 1st, and I said this on a podcast recently. The first 2 weeks of this shutdown or stay in place, it was in the middle of the month, and now we've hit April 1st, and it's rent day. And a lot of people not paying their rent because they have to make a choice, rent or food, if that's an extreme. So now you go up the chain to the landlord who doesn't get 60% of his rent money, which is now his apartment building is part of a REIT or it's part of something else. And this is David's territory with the REITs.
Oh, yeah.
How far up are we going to see the pain? Are we looking at, obviously, retail REITs, real estate investment trusts were collapsing anyway. But if the landlord is only getting half his rent, how does that affect, his insurance and what he needs to do with the money going up higher on the ladder? How does that look?
So first, let me explain something. In late 2007, I moved down to Florida temporarily. I have a friend who had a small airline down there, and he let me stay in his beachfront condo. And after a couple of months of being down there, when things really started to get bad in 08, he suggested I go out and I find houses to flip. I rode around, took about 2 months, looked at a lot of properties, and told him I didn't think it was a time to flip, but it would be a great time to buy and hold. So he bought about 15 properties, residential properties in Florida, that he still owns today. So this particular question about landlords, I know this intimately because we're dealing with it. First off, the landlords realistically don't need, if they can get half their rent, they should be fine. They need to have enough rent to cover their insurance, their basic utility costs that they pay, which is generally low, and real estate taxes. This is an interesting economic calamity. This was not a short slide where business wasn't doing well and things began to get worse and worse. This was a one-time, all of a sudden shock. And the banking sector is in very good shape. The Fed is pumping a tremendous amount of liquidity into the market. What that means is that the Federal Reserve is buying loans, and they're taking the loans out of the system, holding it themselves and leaving the banks with cash. So the banks have enough liquidity. They haven't been experiencing losses, and they're getting a lot of pressure from the government to help people through this. Give them deferrals, waive late payments, not foreclose if it's a government-sponsored loan. And other banks are realizing it's much better off to help people through this time than it is to start taking houses back that you can't sell right now anyway. The real estate market is seized up. My mother-in-law is looking to sell a house. She's an elderly woman. She doesn't want people coming into her house that could have the coronavirus. She's 85 years old. And I've talked to a number of people who either folks don't want to go into houses or the owners don't want them there. And the market is coming to a grinding halt. So the banks don't want to cause that kind of a collapse because they won't get their money back. They're better off to just kind of hold their breath, get through this, and hopefully everything gets set back up in 6 months with getting some relief on the other side. What I've been involved in 2 webinars that I've led this past week in the engineering sector. And one of the things I've explained to leaders of these firms is if you have to cut back on your payroll, one of the first things you should do is get your staff together and explain to them, call your mortgage company and ask for relief, call your landlord and ask for relief, then call the credit card companies, the student loan companies, and your auto loan, and ask each one of them for relief. Typical US resident is probably paying 30-odd% of their income for housing. Layer on some student loans, credit cards, and car payments, and you're getting close to where half your money's going. So if you can get those cash outflows to give you some relief, all of a sudden you're not in the same painful squeeze as you are. And my daughter, her landlord contacted them, she and her roommate, and said, look, if you can't pay the rent in April, I'm going to give you a free pass. And she responded, our hours have been cut, but we can pay half of it, so we'd like to. A friend of mine is a senior vice president of sales of an equipment finance company with probably 25% of their customers in the hospitality industry. So these are restaurants. And they did the numbers, they borrowed some money from a bank to cover their interest payment, and they said to everybody in their portfolio, if you need to skip a payment, you can. They were surprised how few took them up on it. And they're planning on doing it again in May. If the finance sources continue to do that, it'll help things through. And on the housing side, I don't think that the people who own houses, unless they're highly leveraged, need the full amount of rent to get by. And if they're working with whoever holds their mortgage, they can get by with a lot less than the full amount of rent.
Question for you, and Curt, I know this is something you always ask and talk about. Are there opportunities now for investors to go in and buy low with the idea that eventually, and you said 2 years, David, when we get back to some semblance of normalcy, it will end up being a good return on their investment if you get in low now?
So, Jimmy, I have a daily feed that comes out of, like I told you, my friend had bought a number of properties in Florida. And over the past 9 months, I've been watching the Worcester market closely. I have a feed that comes out every day and tells me what the prices are of multifamily homes in Worcester. Over the past week, I've been seeing some of the ads with price reductions. So is it a good time? Yeah. I think the better time is going to be a little bit further down the road for people who want to sell and are willing to cut the price, because Worcester's been on fire. Everybody seems to want to own property in Worcester. But
it's the cannabis capital. It's the cannabis capital of Massachusetts. That's where the commission is, and the Summit Lounge is there. And I think it's more dispensaries per square foot in Worcester than any other town in the area.
Probably is. I think they're going to have 15 when 15, or probably about 15 when they're all open.
Yeah. Hey, David, I just want to thank you for taking the time. Curt, you got any last thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
A couple. I know David mentioned the court system, and I know that he said in Massachusetts they're only doing actually domestic assault and
criminal.
Criminal, right?
Criminal.
And that
What's
that
the
kind of
matter,
lays.
Curt? You didn't run out of edibles at home,
It's
did
funny.
you?
Everyone's talking about how the divorce and domestic assault, may be creeping up here as we spend more time with each other. But that the fact, we brought up in an article that really for cannabis legalization have its best chance, we need to go into a deep, long recession, depression. The worse it gets, the better it is you'll see legalization. Agree, disagree, and why?
I don't know that I agree with that. That's under the economic theory that we're going to need the tax revenue.
And the jobs, yep.
And the jobs.
And the jobs. I don't know that the jobs in the cannabis sector are going to move the needle enough. And I don't really think that that's what's going to drive it. I think what's going to drive it is if this is a really tight election and and cannabis and marijuana legalization is high on the platform on one side, I could see the other side, if it's a tight race, legalizing marijuana at the last minute to get people to stay home.
Oh, I remember somebody talking about that. Actually, might be happening, and it's kind of a scary thought. David, how do people get in touch with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and Jimmy, I'll let you give them the information on that. If you want to email me directly, it's drabinovitz@gmail.com. And
Terrific.
That's the best way to get in touch with me.
Terrific. And we appreciate you coming on with us on a regular basis. And good luck, and stay safe and stay healthy. And that really is the most important thing these days.
Stay safe, buddy.
Take care.
right.
Thanks, Curt. Thanks, Jimmy.
All right.
You bet. Curt, any final thoughts before I wrap this baby up?
I think David gave some really good advice from a very, blue collar, humble guy. It's not this webinar from a hedge fund guy, and he had some really good advice for not just cannabis businesses, right? The first thing you can do if you can't create the plus side, the revenue, cut those expenses. How do I do that? Well, match up your inflows to your outflows and contact all the people you owe money to, as he talked about, and try to get that the negative part of your balance in the checkbook lower right away. That's saving you money. That's money in your pocket. So really good tips. If you're in the cannabis space, it's even extra hard. But as a general business, those are really.
Well, he's Curt Dalton. He's the founder of Cannabis.net, and we certainly recommend you guys checking out that site, one of the more popular cannabis sites in the world. And Pro Cannabis Media will be here to produce more of these Weed Talk Now chats. And if you're interested in that, you can find us at info@procannabismedia.com. But for now, for Curt Dalton from Cannabis.net, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. In fact, it's a whole new world out there. Let's all be safe. Let's all be healthy, stay away from each other, and continue to at least have these kinds of conversations. And we'll talk to you next time on Weed Talk Now.
A big shout out to Revolutionary Clinics, a medical dispensary in the Boston area with 3 locations, 2 in Cambridge and 1 in Somerville. Rev Clinics recently donated 100 gallons of hand sanitizer to local hospitals. They package those products in their Fitchburg Grow facility, and they'll all arrive in hospitals the first of next week. That's why at Rev Clinics, the patient really does come first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.